after the fabulous presentation by Michelle from Dora Does. She's here with us.
Hi.
All ready for your questions and comments. So come on in, pop along in a chat and let us know who's made the journey back over to the live and what questions you might have about crochet ribbing, about crochet garments in general, because Michelle is one of the amazing designers that produces quite not so much technical, but really thoughtfully designed crochet garments. There is, the attention to detail with Michelle is just amazing. So if you ever tried one of Michelle's patterns, you will definitely know what I'm talking about. But, it's just those little design elements that elevates the crochet garments to a whole new level. So we've got good morning from Stephanie. Hello. Ask away any questions what you might have. We are waiting for them.
They were in the chat in YouTube. We saw you.
Yes.
Michelle, you did like the basics, the beginner stuff of ribbing last year, didn't you, for us in the summer?
Yeah, because I remember last year when I was doing it, there was so much that I wanted to talk about, and I was like, I can't actually get it all in this. So it's really nice to come back.
Yeah.
Because last year it was a lot about adding ribbing or kind of starting off a garment with ribbing and kind of how to make that work. So it was really nice this time to talk about the kind of functional aspect of ribbing, because I think it's often the sort of thing that people don't pick up on unless they start to use different ribbing. I know there was someone in the comments that said they tried ribbing and were disappointed with the results, and often it's choosing the right stitch for what you want to achieve, and that was like really the point I wanted to get across. And like I know you said all this week, hopefully it should be something the designer does for you, but if you're freestyling something or you've used it somewhere and want to try it somewhere else, really understanding that will just help you get a more successful outcome. So it was really nice to have the chance to come back for part 2 and get the rest off my chest.
Come back again. And I think though, like you say about, hopefully it's something the designer does for you, but very often like it's the way that the designer wants it. Like I like these long cuffs, but I know lots of people don't. So like then giving people the tools and the knowledge to be able to go, actually, I want mine shorter, but then how does that work? How do I, does that give me a much bigger part of the sleeve here? How do I change that rib stitch perhaps to make it work for me? Or necklines. So my mum and I like very, very different necklines at different heights and different, thicknesses, etc. So like if we both made the very same pattern, we'd change the neckline, most definitely.
Yeah. What do you prefer then?
I'm happy with higher necklines and tighter necklines, and she's just like, nope, get it away.
With your mum. And it was really interesting actually, because yesterday I was watching Sandra's presentation on round yokes, and I have quite a few round yoke designs, which generally I don't use the short rows, because she was talking about short rows, but they have a wider neckline, which kind of counters for that. And I'm like, and you can always make a neckline smaller. It's a bit harder to make it bigger. So that's why I've err on this kind of size.
Yeah. I love it. Right, people are coming in.
I was going to say, let's keep up with the questions.
Sorry, everyone. I'm skipping the job here. So Joanne's saying she loves ribbing.
Fantastic.
I feel it's a love or hate thing, isn't it? For most people, but like when you get it, you really get it.
And I think the different styles, some people, like I mentioned, some people hate slip stitch ribbing. I like it. When you get in the zone, it's quite an easy thing to do, and it's like,
you two just like to torture people with your slip stitch ribbing.
I'm really into the yarn over slip stitch though, or I know it's called.
Okay, I'll let you off. That's not too bad.
It looks amazing. Whereas you see, I find that you need to get in the zone with it to get that little
And you need to twist it, and
But you need to loosen up, don't you? Because really, like doing it tightly, it's a nightmare. But when you get that loose hand on it, it does look stunning. I have to say.
Yeah, and actually, in the hat that I showed in the video, the Fisherman's Winter hat, there's actually a video that's on my channel that goes with the pattern, and it's not a full tutorial, but I've got all my tips for crocheting, slip stitch ribbing, and how to make it a bit easier in that video. Fantastic, so if you think you hate it, have a little watch and see if you can just slightly alter the way you do it to make it so much easier.
Pick up some tips on it. Yeah, definitely.
So we have a question of saying, should we always use the same yarn for ribbing, or can we switch it up to a finer weight?
Ooh, Oh, that's a good question. I think it's up to you. What I do, what I tend to do is so with this one, for example,
We move it.
I mean, I've used different yarns throughout this garment. I've used these 3 different ones, but they're all the same weight. But I tend to go down a hook size. That's what I like to do. But actually, I think mixing up yarn weight. So your cuff on that sweater you were showing us, Hannah, like you kind of pull it in. So actually, working with a smaller
would work.
A smaller, you know, finer yarn on that would work really well. So it's a really interesting way to introduce like contrasting textures and styles within a garment. So yeah, you could totally do that. Have a play.
I love that. I love how we're giving people permission to go for it.
Experiment.
So slip stitch ribbing is the one with the most elasticity. I hate saying that word, but I think that was okay. I made a jumper. I made a jumper with ribbing at the bottom of alternating rows of half double crochet back loop and single crochet back loop that had no elasticity at all.
Yeah, if you've done like if you make so half double and okay, I'm just visualizing it. So yes, I find slip stitch back loop only has the most elasticity. It's really, really boingy. Love it.
I love that word. Boingy.
Boingy. Yeah. There's only so many words.
It's a technical term.
Snapback in the video, but boingy has a visual for me. And yeah, half double crochet back loop and single crochet back loop, they do have stretch, and I think they are both really common, but they are a little bit more or a little bit less elastic. So I think there's still both good options for kind of a hat, but they can sometimes over time kind of you know, stretch out if you wear it a bit and they lose some of that, well, they sort of stretch. Something you can do sneakily is get a bit of hat elastic and sew it back in if you're that way inclined.
Yeah, I've done that before. Yeah,
you know, if you know you've got a hat that you love but it's just starting to give, or if you've done the ribbing at the end, pull it off and redo the ribbing, because that's often a quick way to do it.
I often think with half double crochet especially, it's a denser stitch, is it? Because there's that extra loop and that extra thing, and so I think they just have less give in them. Especially if you go down a hook size, I think you just have to be very careful. If you're going down a hook size, I think the slip stitch works beautifully. Yeah, I'm always going to champion that.
And actually, this one, I don't know if you can see. So this is half double in the front third loop. So I like to distinguish between the front and back with the third loop crochet, and it's not got loads of stretch, but for like a cuff and a neckline, I absolutely love it. It just, you know, the way the kind of cadence with which I've slip stitched here, it just pulls it in slightly, but it's not functional. I mean, it does provide a really nice edge to a cuff ribbing, whatever you choose, because it is more robust and it's more got that density, so it sort of protects in a way the rest of the garment. That's my feeling about it.
And then that comes on to Kim's question: what type of ribbing would you recommend for decoration yet function?
I think it depends what function you're looking. So again, you know, with hats, the slip stitch ribbing is great for that elasticity. However, I find if you put it just on the brim of a hat, you know, you want to make it quite deep, otherwise it can, because your ribbing needs to play with the rest of the fabric. So if you've got a really tight ribbing, which you might want for like a beret or something that really pulls in and then goes out. So I think it is project specific and location specific. So again, in terms of functionality, this provides as much function as I want, which is a nice solid edge with a little bit of pull in, and I love how this looks. So again, it depends what function you're looking for. And if you watch through that tutorial where I've got all those 11 tutorials, I talk a little bit about, you know, the stretch and elasticity of each.
So based on that, they could choose for the specific project what fits the best.
Exactly. And actually, I've just remembered when you were talking to Nadia, I caught that discussion yesterday about the kid's dress with the skirt that stretched out of shape, and you mentioned about putting like ribbing in the center. So for that, you choose something without stretch, so something like the single crochet, the front post single crochets, which doesn't have much stretch, and I showed in the swatch.
But it looks like ribbing.
It looks like ribbing, but it's not got that. So if you don't want something to move, that's another function that you could consider.
definitely. And so Catherine's asking, do you use less stitches in, for example, a sleeve cuff along with a smaller hook?
I'm not sure what you mean by less stitches.
Or do you mean to pull it in more? Do you mean?
So the way I do it is when I tend to add it at the end. So I will slip stitch. So I'll work my ribbing up and down, and then I'll slip stitch into this last round. So you can change the number of stitches that you slip stitch into, and if you slip stitch into more, that's going to tighten it up. So I might, like, depending on what stitch I'm using, I change the number of stitches that I'm slip stitching into.
And I do that. I give that sometimes as options for because of being my mum's neckline thing. Options. I'm like, I slip stitched into 3, but that's because that's how that sits nicely on me. But you can also do it into 2. You can go 2, 3, 2, 3. You can go 1, 2, 1, 2. You know, like, just try it. And if anyone, sorry,
I was just going to say that this is, you're so right. So I find, for example, this one, the stitches are shorter because I'm working the front third loop, so I slip stitch into 2, and then occasionally, so you can't really see, but on the edge around the sides I slip stitch into 3 to cinch it in a little bit. If I were doing half double crochet back loop, those stitches are a bit taller, so generally I slip stitch in to 3 if I want that little pull in, or if I want it to sort of stay flat flush, I will do 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah.
And that's another great trick, isn't it? For depending on the length of your, if you're doing a cropped one and you then want it to pull in and your waist is smaller than your bust,
I've done with this.
Exactly. You can. That's awesome. So, like, I love that.
It goes in. This is my current crochet along that I'm doing, that I've just finished. But this was cropped and it was a bit too cropped. So actually, what I did is I extended the length of this ribbing.
Love it.
To make it sit. I mean, I've got a vest on because it's cold, but get the idea.
That's just a really easy trick, isn't it? To then your ribbing can really transform your garment and make it look completely different and make it fit you better. So there's this whole thing of, we said, you know, technical adjustments, you can add stitches here, you can do this here, you can do that there. Actually, if you get to the end point and you're like, it's still not quite right, use your ribbing to adjust the sleeves.
Save your project.
And that's why I love
make it what you want
at the end, because it's, you know, we talk about fudging things, and let's be honest, we all fudge things if they've not quite come out.
I don't know what you mean. No, never.
I know you always get it right first time.
No. Right, so we have a question about link stitches being similar to Tunisian, and that creates a less holey fabric. Does that make the fabric more dense like Tunisian?
Yes, and generally I go up a hook size when I'm working linked crochet stitches. It makes them a little bit easier to work them. It's linked crochet stitches are essentially like really short Tunisian rows, depending on whether you do double, half double, treble, so forth, depending on the height of the stitch. But they're a great gateway to Tunisian, actually, because the kind of movement to create link stitches is very similar to the movement, but you just work link stitches at 90 degrees, so you tend to work them that way instead of that way. But they are quite a nice dense fabric because you're linking the center of the stitches so they don't pull apart.
And then Esther's asking us about short rows in crochet. I think that we've mentioned it the last couple of days, haven't we? And it's obviously quite a new thing to people, and I think people possibly have done them in patterns, but you haven't realized that they're short rows.
I mean, ribbing is short rows, really, when you think about it. I love, and it's something I'm exploring more. So this sweater, this is the sequel sweater, and I've got a cardigan version. This uses short rows for the sleeve cap, and I'm loving this technique.
Brilliant.
It's like I'm going to use it on all my sleeves, and it just allows better fitting because you're adding fabric here without adding it here, so you get a much closer fit at the underarm. And really, they can be so intimidating. I know they can, but they're just short rows, and you progressively make them longer or shorter to create the shape that you want. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of short rows. I'm really in that zone at the moment, loving them.
And you work them in exactly the same way as you work any regular crochet. It's just how many stitches you do before you then stop and either join to the thing that you're already joining to, or go back and then join at the other end to the thing. You're basically making a shape to fit the shape you want it. Does that make
so
sense?
you're like creating that curve by having a short row and going longer and longer and longer, like that. I've got a tutorial actually on my blog which introduces short rows, and it shows you a little bit about the different shaping and shows you the different projects, and you might find you've already worked them, you just didn't necessarily
realize
that's the
that they were definitely.
So what's your cal called? Sorry, Hannah, that you run the cal for your sweater, Michelle, didn't you? So that includes the short rows, doesn't it?
Yeah, so it's the cal is for this and for the cardigan that uses the same technique. So it will teach you how to do the short row sleeve cal.
Yeah.
There's 2 patterns that you can buy to work with the cal. It's all free on YouTube. It's still ongoing, so we've got a couple of weeks left, and this is the sweater that I've been making as part of that. I finished sewing in the ends yesterday, so we've got a couple of weeks left, but it's evergreen, so if you want to take that, you can you can kind of work it at your own pace, and all the videos are up there, loads of tutorials to support.
So anyone who wants to learn the short rows, go and join Michelle's cal, and she will teach you everything there is to know.
Come and be a short row fan.
So can you also use ribbing as an edge to blankets?
Yes. I think it's a really good edge to blankets, because I think it helps them keep their shape, just like it will help a cuff keep its shape, or a neckline. I think that's really great. Obviously you're going to have quite a lot of ribbing to work, but I think
long way round.
makes a lovely border. And
you would have to choose the right ribbing though, wouldn't it? You don't want it to be kind of pulling in, you want it to be just as wide and long as the blanket.
I would definitely experiment with your tension on that. And you'd have to think about the corners. So if you were working that sort of vertical ribbing, at right angles, you'd have to think about how you would navigate the corners. So I think if you're kind of working up, you get to the edge, you'll sort of have to start from the top and then work that, and then so that I would say would be the thing that you just need to maybe plan out a little bit in advance. It's like when you work down a cardigan and across the bottom, you can kind of work down there and then sort of start the ribbing again and go across, or vice versa, depending on what you like it.
And I would say
like a right angle onto each other.
I would say for a blanket as well, just like you would with, or I would recommend with garments, is block first, then add your ribbing. Otherwise you can get into all sorts of trouble.
And especially if it's a blanket that's going to change with blocking. Because blankets can be notoriously tricky to block just because of their size. So block first. And I would always do a sneaky round of single crochet around the edge, just to make it
rather
easier.
than edges of rows. Definitely. So what kind of edge do you recommend for a brimmed summer hat?
Ooh,
good question.
I think it depends what sort of hat you're on. If you're on like a kind of bucket hat, something like that, you kind of, I would, work rounds of sort of single crochet or something at the end, just to keep that structure. So I think it depends on the style of hat. I mean, I have never I've never tried, but I haven't really made any hats, with the big I'm not sure what the right term is for it, with the big brim, but I think with that you've got to have a really tight tension to make it solid. And I think with that you also need to think about your fiber. I wouldn't try making that kind of thing out of wool. So it depends what structure you want the brim to have, but generally if you want something that's not going to move too much, you want tight tension and small stitches, I would say.
Or perhaps the link stitches could work for that one. Really dense.
Although I'm not sure they stand up on their own. So again, it depends. It depends what part of the structure you want them to form.
I know people kind of put, if it's a large brim, they put like a metal wire.
You can get some tape stuff as well, I think, can't you? That you can crochet over and stuff.
Or even you kind of crochet almost like how you do with a basket kind of thing.
Crochet over the rope.
Or ropes, that kind of thing might work.
Because then it would still squish, wouldn't it, if you want to take it on holiday if it's a summer hat. Whereas your metal might not work quite so well. Jeanette's saying, I've extended ribbing on a cardigan front to make it a bit more oversized. You really can transform
really
stuff.
Tip. Finished your cardigan and it's a bit tight,
Yeah.
extend the ribbing, you've got a wider button
Yeah.
band, and it's generally over like really, really nice fits.
Yeah, that's what we said. Like your ribbing can really save your project. If
Yeah.
something's not quite meeting in the middle, just add a few stitches onto your ribbing and it will nicely come together.
Definitely. Oh, and we have a comment saying there's a topic for next year's summit, short rows.
Yeah,
There
and I've
we
been
go.
thinking that this week.
You're
I'm
booked.
like,
You're booked, Michelle.
Talk about socks or short rows next week.
Love it, lovely. And we have Marley Bird here. We have Marley and we have Brianna here with us chatting away as well. Hello.
Hello.
And Dolly, just to go over again then, so what are linked stitches?
So linked stitches, you can create them in any of the kind of basic stitches from half double crochet. So half double, double, treble, and so forth. Essentially, when you do the yarn over, instead of yarning over, you insert your hook into the horizontal bar of the previous stitch and yarn over, like use that to create the yarn over. So you insert the hook, yarn over, and pull up your loop, so you've got that extra loop on, and then you kind of work the stitch as normal. And then if you're working a treble, for example, you'll do that twice instead of yarning over twice. And what it does, it just connects each stitch to the previous stitch, so they don't separate as much. They're a really nice stitch for garments. Again, go up at least one hook size, probably two. But they have lovely drape. I've got a few. I've got a summer top pattern actually called the Corona Vest, which uses linked stitches, and it uses all different lengths of stitches. And actually I've got a free pattern on the blog called the Extension Scarf, and it's like a linked crochet stitch stampless scarf. That's not easy for me to say, but it's a really good quick project if you want to like practice with the stitches.
Have a go. Yeah.
And it's free on the blog, so yeah, it's worth having a look. And I've got linked stitch tutorials. I'm a big
I was just going to say that you probably have got step by step, so definitely a great resource to go and check out.
Yeah, and I dropped the link actually in the comments on the presentation. I put a link to the link stitch tutorial there.
And I think it's a really good idea to say to people, like, you have to like actually try a project in it. It's really worth it, rather than just do a small swatch, because I've done that before. I've done a swatch of a stitch or whatever, and I think this is my problem with Tunisian crochet is I've only ever done a swatch. And then I'm like, well, it's never going to become anything. It's never going to be like, whereas if I go, I'm going to make a scarf, off we go.
And a scarf's great because sizing doesn't matter so much.
Yeah, exactly.
If you stop, you kind of make a shorter one or join it together and turn it into a cowl.
Exactly. Stop when you're ready to stop. But yeah, I think always going into a new technique with an intention of making it into something is a really good idea.
Yeah.
Definitely, because we've all got yarn stashed away that we can use, haven't we? It needs a life somewhere, doesn't it? You know, hello.
A couple of balls here and there.
Oh dear. And this is an interesting one from Kim saying, I've seen some designs that you do the ribbing separately and then sew it. Does that change the elasticity? Everyone keeps using that word of your cuff, etc.
That's a really good comment. And I think for reasons we've discussed, I always personally prefer to add the ribbing after, because you kind of can control and maintain that sort of flow between the garment and where you add the ribbing. But I know there are some cases where doing the ribbing first and sewing definitely helps. And I think it probably wouldn't change hugely the elasticity of the ribbing itself, but depending on how you sew it and what stitch you use to sew it will change it. And I do actually have, from last year's presentation, I talk about how to crochet into the ribbing ends rather than sewing it. And that if I am starting with ribbing, that is my preferred technique rather than sewing it on. But I know people do sometimes like to do sewing, and I just think use a stitch when you're sewing it, use a stitch that is going to have some stretch. So if you'd like slip stitched it together, for example, that would kind of restrict stretch, which might be what you want to do. So just think about whether you want to or not. And I know there was a presentation about seaming, so it may be that there's some tips in there about what might be the best sewn stitch to use for that.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, we've run out of time yet again.
Already? It's been so nice to chat.
I know. Who knew there was so much to talk about ribbing, hey? Because I think it's almost like an afterthought for lots of people. They're just like, oh, I've got to do the ribbing now.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got, and it's not, it's just something we have to endure, lots of people feel.
Like embrace it.
Yeah, and know that it can transform, especially with garments. It can transform and it can, like you say,
break it, doesn't
it
it?
can make it or break it.
Yeah.
If you do it right, it can make it look really, really professional. And that's what lots of people say, don't they? How do I make my garments look that like next level?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's all in the details.
Just
Like
adding
you
that.
said, just that if you didn't have that on there, it would still look lovely. But
it just adds that finish, doesn't it? You know, it's
Yeah.
just, and also like collars and cuffs matching. It's always
Yeah.
always ends up nice.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
definitely.
And for those asking, I'll drop a link to the Cal homepage in the original video presentation on my
Yes.
YouTube. Just so
Yeah,
anyone wants to write it down.
Please do, Michelle.
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you
Awesome.
guys. It's been
Thank you so much.
amazing.
Thank you,
And
Michelle.
on to the rest of the
Amazing.
afternoon.
Awesome. I think it's me next. I'm up.
Yes.
Talking about colour.
We've got people waiting already.
People waiting. Right, let's go. Let's go and watch that, and then join us back, and I will answer any questions that you have.
That's
Michelle,
right.
thank you so much.